We're good to go.
I'm good for it, whenever you are.
Well, we've got everyone's slides, so who's going first? No, who's going first?
Group one.
Group one?
Yes.
All right.
Group last 5.
I shouldn't have introduced you guys. You are okay. You listed the
Missing.
Stay on this side. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Morning. Morning.
Our group 1 hours is to make a presentation on the audit committee. In our group, we have Lisanda, Siko, myself, Sylvester, Hussein, Dumisani, and Anna. Who appoints the audit committee, and why do we have to appoint an audit committee? The governing body appoints the audit committee because it is a statutory requirement. And organizations that issue audited financial statements should actually consider establishing an audit committee. What is the mandate of the audit committee? The audit committee should present an independent oversight of the effectiveness of the organization's assurance functions and services, with particular focus on combined assurance arrangements, including external assurance service providers, internal audit, and finance functions. The integrity of the annual financial statements, also that's an independent oversight of the integrity of the annual financial statements, and to the extent delegated by the governing body, other external project issued by the organization. So it's not only the annual financial statements, but also it can be about external reports issued by the organization. Who is in the audit committee? Each committee should have at least a minimum of 3 members, subject to legal provisions where applicable. All members of the audit committee should be independent, non-executive members of the governing body. And also the chairperson of the audit committee should not be the same chairperson of the governing body, but an independent, non-executive member to chair the audit committee. Recommended qualifications. Recommended member qualifications. Company regulations. Company Regulation 42 requires that at least 1/3 of the members of the company's audit committee of any particular time must have academic qualifications or experience in either economics, law, corporate governance, finance, accounting, commerce, industry, public affairs, or HR management. I will give it over to you to continue.
Thank you, Vina. Morning, everyone. You might wonder, what are the responsibilities of the audit committee? Why do audit committees exist in organizations, both public as well as private companies? Audit committees are there to create a statement as to whether the audit committee is satisfied that the external auditor is independent of the organization. So the external auditor shouldn't have any influence on the organization, shouldn't have any kind of a relationship with the organization at hand. This statement that is created by the audit committee should specify and address the following. Firstly, the policy and controls that address the provision of non-audit services by the external auditor and the nature and extent of such services rendered during the financial year or period at hand. The second one, the tenure of the external audit firm, and in the event of the firm having been involved in a merger or acquisition, including the tenure of the predecessor firm. And then the third one would be the rotation of the designated external audit partner. This is done so that we don't keep bringing the same people and then we develop a relationship with them and we're able to influence them, and then they stop acting objective or giving correct audit findings. The statement is supposed to give significant changes in the management of the organization during the external audit firm's tenure, which may mitigate the attendant risk of familiarity between the external audit firm as well as the management, as I've just said. Some of the responsibilities of the audit committee will include the consideration that the audit committee has to keep in mind in relation to annual financial statements, as we know, and how these were addressed by the committee. So the committee had access to these statements. How were these statements then scrutinized? The quality of the external audit with reference to the audit quality indicators, such as those that may be included in inspection reports by external audit regulations. Also, the effectiveness of the chief audit executive and the arrangements of the internal audit. Now, the internal audit, just to remind you, is the audit team that is within the organization, versus the external auditors, which in the case of Buffalo City Municipality, which is the institution I work for, would be the Auditor General. The Audit Committee is also responsible for the effectiveness of the design and implementation of the internal financial controls and on the nature and extent of any significant weaknesses in the design. This is done so as to avoid loopholes, the implementation or execution of internal financial controls that resulted in material financial loss, fraud, corruption, and error. Also, the Audit Committee is there to ensure the effectiveness of the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, and the finance function, be it the finance department or directorate. The arrangements in place for combined assurance and the committee's views on its effectiveness. The content of the Audit Committee report. Why? What is it that we get there and do? What does the Audit Committee do? The content. This would describe how the Audit Committee carried out its own functions, stating whether the Audit Committee is satisfied that the auditor was independent of the company. Commenting in any way that the committee considers appropriate financial statements, the accounting practices, the internal financial controls of the company organization. And now, when we as Group 1 look at Fokolfontein in relation to in relation to audit committees. So this is how we get involved in a project like this. So the audit committee is there to audit or to give an input to findings, audit findings of the organization. And this happens in hindsight. We don't get involved in the onset, but we audit what has already happened. So the audit committee will check whether the correct processes were followed with regard to expenditure. In my case at BCM, we'd have to check if it was in lines with the MFMA and the sorts. Comment also on financial statements, accounting practices, and internal financial records controls. Were these followed? Where was it, and if it wasn't, we report on that it wasn't. If it was, we also report that, well, there were no findings of the contrary there. And then we make submissions to the board on accounting policy, financial controls, and the records and reporting thereafter. If there were risks or things that were out of line that we picked up during our assessment, we would then refer that to the risk committee. We wouldn't influence because we are looking in hindsight. As a group, we are willing to chat with you guys. You've got 1 minute. We are willing to chat with you guys, pick your brains on what you guys thought on Fokolfontein in relation to audit committees.
Sure.
You've got a few minutes. You can ask us any questions. Yes, sir.
How do you spell Fokol? Super. Okay, feedback.
Yeah, we've had a chat with on a group on the project Fokol. I don't know which.
Whatever you are.
Yeah. And we acknowledge that this is a good initiative, and it will be done maybe at a place whereby people they will like get to, not that they don't know that they are the levels of inequality in our society in South Africa, but it's a case of one deciding what to do about it, and perhaps doing it in that context, in that festival, it will maybe pick their brains a bit and say, let's do something. Now the question is, how do you do it in such a way that it catches their attention and it achieves the desired goals? Now, we were just speaking, but can you do it to be a theater kind of thing, or a comedy, like a stand-up comedy kind of thing, whereby you just get in and get people laughing, but then speak then true to power in terms of what are the effects of inequalities in our society, and what is it that one can do in the little corner that one lives in to make sure that addresses inequality. Yeah, I think basically it's that. It's mainly how do you do it to catch people's attention.
Thanks. Can I just add what I think of your presentation and where it comes from in this context? You've all heard of Enron. The crime of Enron, where did it emanate?
In financial statements.
They were too close in their relationship with Arthur Andersen. The merging in where this all comes from was that auditors were just auditors through the 70s and 80s. That's all they did. Then somebody came up with this wonderful idea that auditing companies should be a one-stop shop. We should provide all the ancillary services: consulting, tax, computers, insurance, as a way of building these massive audit practices. But now you've got the auditor who's supposed to be independent, who is part of the business. And we get to pally-pally. Added to this, we've had a thing for many, many years in the auditing profession that the relationship with the audit partner, particularly, is too close. The audit partner was the guy who originally found the client, and he stayed with that client to maintain the client relationship forever. So, you can imagine, if there was a stuff up last year that is found this year, and the auditor didn't pick it up last year, if he's not reviewed, what's he going to do this year? He's going to bury it. If it comes to the other aspect which you didn't, and I'm happy with your summary here, if it comes to the other aspect which is auditor's remuneration. Now, auditor's remuneration, that's an open can of worms. If your audit firm is too close to your management, then all you've got to do is pay the auditor and you can do what you want.
Yeah.
Okay? I remember, for example, once, years ago, this must be 20 years ago, I did a tax deal for a client who was an audit client. And they were so happy with it that over a lunch we agreed that I would bill this extravagant fee under the title Petties, Sundries and Extras. Why? Agreed over lunch. Audit fees for years were discussed at lunch at the Rand Club in Joburg. Okay, the overrun or the underrun, it was generally the overrun. You know, and when you'd had enough port, you'd go down to the snooker room and say, right, who thinks the black ball pays the audit fee? It was that sort of silliness that came into it. And so what we're saying is, this is giving transparency to the audit process. It's combined assurance that we're not too pally-pally with our auditor. If our auditor is doing other things for us, it must be disclosed. Okay? Rotation of audit partners is very important, because that's where it gets too close. Because if there is audit failure, the audit partner is as much exposed as management. So they can mutually agree to cover it up. And by rotating the partners, it comes out. So we're going back to the good old Salvation Army principle of nobody does the same job forever.
Yeah.
Okay? Well done. Thank you very much. Next group, please.
Hi, good morning everybody. I'm going to be talking on behalf of the Big Five, otherwise known as Group 2. And I'm going to be discussing the Social and Ethics Committee. There we've got all of our team members. So what I'm going to do is just start off with an overview of what the objectives are of the committee. So firstly, what King 4 does, so there's legal requirements, but what King 4 does is that it encourages organizations that aren't necessarily legally obligated to create a committee, to actually create one. So that's the first thing. And then it requires a sort of a higher standard of the committee than what's necessarily put forward in the Companies Act. The thing that they do is that they sort of try and adopt a inclusive view of the companies, all right? So that it must look at a broader range of issues, all right? So from social, sort of social benefits, looking at the role of all stakeholders, society and the environment. So if we look at sort of what the legislative requirements are, so we'll start there. Let's watch the camera. Okay, so So firstly, the Companies Act requires that only certain organizations need to actually have an S&E committee. So every state-owned company, listed companies, and other companies with a PRC score of greater than 500. Okay. what else it says is that there must at least be one director who's not involved in the day-to-day management of the company and not been involved for the previous 3 years. Okay, so the other thing that's required is that it must monitor the organization's activities, okay, and there's a couple of issues that it needs to look at. So I'm not going to go through these all in detail. So there's the social and economic development, okay. And one of the things that's sort of highlighted is by the United Nations Global Compact Principles, and I'll actually talk about that for a second in the next slide, because that was kind of interesting. Looking at issues of corruption, employment equity, and EEE. The other thing is obviously looking at educational development of the employees, and this is something that I will be touching on a bit later as well. All right, so if we have a look at what those 10 principles are, I'm not going to go through them all in detail, but essentially there's 4 categories, right? So the first thing is about human rights, okay? So as an organization, we have to make sure that we're not abusing humans, all right? Basically, don't do unto others what you would not have done unto you, right? Okay, so the other thing is labor, all right? So is to treat your employees in a fair manner, all right? So, and also ensure that you abolish things like child labor and to remove and eliminate any forms of discrimination. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of other principles there. The other aspect is the environment. As we all well know from sustainability, we have to always be mindful of the environment, and we have a broader sort of ecological responsibility. And this is something that the S&E committee needs to take into account. And we have to be ethical in our business practices and in terms of corruption, bribery, and all those other bad things. Right, so if we go back, so what we also want is something that would create good corporate citizenship, right, addressing to ensure that we have equality, that we prevent unfair discrimination, corruption, as I've mentioned before. Furthermore, also we need to develop the communities in which we operate, okay, in various means. Okay, and possibly keep track of sponsorship, donations, charitable giving, and that kind of thing. Within the organization, okay, so obviously we spoke about the environment, okay, but also there's an internal environment to ensure the health and the health of our workers, and also from the broader community, that we're not, or we have to be cognizant of public safety as well. The other aspect is that consumer relationships, okay, to make sure that we build long-lasting consumer relationships, to ensure at the end of the day profitability and sustainability of the organization. Okay, and labor and employment, right, so treating our workers in a fair manner, which includes then also educational development. So what does King 4 have to say? Well, so again, in compliance, in sort of building on the Act, it says we should really consider oversight and reporting to the board on aspects of organizational ethics, responsible corporate citizenship, sustainable development, and the stakeholder relationships, as is appropriate for the organization. Okay? What will the committee be? Who will make up the committee? So what King 4 says, right, so remember before, the legal requirement is that it must be one sort of more or less non-executive member. So it says should have executive and non-executive members, with the majority being non-executive members, right? So we want kind of an independent oversight on what we as a committee are doing in terms of our broader social and sort of responsibility. Okay, the CEO is not explicitly excluded, as is stated in King 4. So in other committees, the CEO he can't be on those committees, whereas we would welcome the CEO into our committee. And similarly, so the chair can also be a member of the committee, but he can't be a chair of our committee. So he's welcome to come along. So what is it that we are going to be looking at doing? Okay, so as I've said, so it's about oversight, so providing the sort of broad picture view of the organization, and reporting back to the board on a broad range of issues. Okay, so there's social and economic development, good corporate citizenship, environmental health and public safety, consumer relationships, ethics and corruption. So we obviously are going to have to set up policies and guidelines in doing that and report how are we doing along those measures. Sustainability. Okay, so one of the things that as the committee what we should do is to provide an independent review of the, for example, the integrated report. Okay, that as an organisation we have to produce, and to ensure that our organisation will be sustainable in the long term. Okay, labour and unemployment, education of staff, and one of the things we have to look at is how are we faring on BEE, okay, and report back to the board on our BEE score and what can we do better. Okay, all right. So what we can do is we can look at this in sort of a broader picture. So we have a whole bunch of different aspects that we need to look at, and us as the Social and Ethics Committee, what we need to do is we're reporting back really to two groups. So there's internal reporting within our organisation to the shareholders, right? We have to make sure that our shareholders are aware that we're doing things in a socially responsible way, but also to the stakeholders, one of which being the board. But then there's also an external reporting. Okay? We need to let the broader community and society know what we are doing, and we're doing things in a socially responsible way. So we also need to report to external stakeholders. Okay, so within South Africa, as I think we're all aware, we're facing a myriad of crises. Okay, so there's plural, and one of which. And many of those, we as within an organisation in the Social Ethics Committee, many of them we can't do anything about. Okay? So what we've decided to do is to pick out one of the issues one of the challenges that we face in the country. And that is, as I'm sure you're all aware, is related to education. Okay? At the end of the day, if our society is not educated, we're in for trouble in the long term. And as an organisation, we have to recognise that, because without educating employees, right, we will eventually go out of business. We have to, South Africa as a country, and all of us, and as a business and from a broader perspective, we're trying to move more towards a knowledge-based economy. This is one of the government's sort of strategic objectives. But having a knowledge-based economy means that you need knowledge-based employees. And without that, we're going to be in trouble. Okay? And if we don't have that, we're out of business. So we have to be proactive and address this head on in some way. Now, we can't, obviously, as a committee, answer all the questions in one go, but there are certain things that we need to think about. And so maybe what we need to think about is certain issues. And firstly, is to consider what are the long-term risks. So if in 20 years' time, if we don't have the correct makeup of the kind of employees that we would want to employ, we're going to be in trouble. So we have to identify what these risks are. Okay, and that's one of the things that our organisation will have to do. We have to look at the sustainability, in particular with respect to our current employees. Right? So we have to look at human capital development internally, and maybe slightly broader than that. Okay, so we would have to, when we get together and discuss this, not only look at our employees, but look at their family, their immediate family, and possibly even extended families. Okay, so maybe we have an employee whose children are wanting to go to university, but what about his brother? And what about his sisters? How are they doing? Are they employed? If they're not, could we maybe not help them out in some way? So these are things that we should consider. Okay, and then looking at a broader thing from a social capital development perspective, are there initiatives that we can embark on to help our community in education? Right? Can we set up sort of mentoring programs for high school children Can we set up sort of winter schools or summer schools? Can we set up exam prep for matrics? And can we intervene at an earlier stage, right? Because studies have shown that a lot of the educational problems happen far earlier than matric, right? And matric is too late to fix the problem. There's a lot of people are focusing on the matric results, but if people have, sort of been screwed over by the education system, it happened way before matric. So can we consider doing something about that in some way or another? And at the end of the day, how can we go about it? Well, we can look at different recommendations for policies, for setting up these things for bursary, skills development, employee training, and etc. And I think the other aspect is that there's been a culture in South Africa of focusing exclusively on university. So the only way to get an education in South Africa is by going to university. But that's not necessarily the right thing to do. Not everybody is made up to go to university. So does that mean that they must be excluded from any kind of tertiary education? Well, no. Right? There's other mechanisms, there's other avenues that they can follow to get an education, to develop skills, to get employed. Right? We're sitting with massive unemployment rates in this country. So all of this is really aimed at trying to look at ultimately in the long term creating employment opportunities. Now, we were having a discussion yesterday about the educational problems that we face in this country. So, young kids, there's roughly about 1 million kids born every year, 1.2 something, but let's call it 1 million, right? So out of that 1 million, how many write matric? It's about 400,000, 500,000, somewhere around there. Only about 300,000 pass matric. Of that, a small fraction go to university. I think only about 100,000 go to university. Of that, only half get their degree eventually. Okay? So only 50,000 of our children today will eventually get a degree. What happens to the 950,000? The other 95%. We're sitting with unemployment, youth unemployment at, what is it, 50, 60%? Whereas 95% are unemployable. I actually think we're doing pretty well. Okay? That we're employing 35% of unemployable youth. We cannot carry on this way as a country and as an organization. We have to address this head on. And if we don't, like I say, we're going to be out of business. Thank you.
Yeah, that's super. I think you showed us what a social ethics committee is about. Okay. The slide was specification was 13 by 9, 16 by 9, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
I
didn't use PowerPoint though, that's the thing.
Okay, well when we're going to put it on a video, where are we going to put you amongst all those notes? That's a very minor, but thank you very much. I think that's great. I think that the one thing that South Africa is going wrong in social ethics is it gets mixed up with marketing. And watch out for this side of it. Your corporate governance, your social responsibility, that is now a huge budget. And a lot of businesses are saying, oh, okay, looking good is part of marketing. And you've got to debate them. Is that part of marketing? Okay? Or are we saying that the social and ethics business is outside of marketing? We don't want those things to get too close together. But well done. Next up. Did you have anything to say about the Fokolfontein?
Oh, it's essentially that was the last thing that I was saying.
Oh, okay.
Well, as a
the social, one of the things the Social and Ethics Committee would look at that is the issues of could it be offensive? One of the biggest fights I've got. Could it be interpreted? Could it create offense? Most people are going to laugh at it, but it's tough stuff. You don't want to go to the step that you go and make some sort of social boo-boo. because then that would become a risk to the organization. That's just the point. Next up.
Three, which is?
Three. Yeah, what is your topic?
Risk.
And your slides, what's all for it?
Oh, okay. That should be interesting.
Focus it.
Morning. We are going to be presenting on the risk committee of the governing body. Our group is group 3, comprises of me, Unati, Natalia, Linda, Mulema, and Kevin. Our outline is just definitions, the King 4 requirements for establishing the risk committee, the appointment of the office bearers of the risk committee, the corporate risks associated with the launch of a new product, which is the video, the Fokolfontein video, and just the conclusion and list of references. We'd just like to start by defining risk and risk management for you. Risk comprises of uncertain events, the probability of such events happening, and the effect, whether positive or negative, that it could have on the achievement of the objectives of the organization. It's important to bear in mind that this also includes opportunities lost. So where an opportunity presents itself and the company does not take advantage of it, or where it's incorrectly followed, then we still count that as a risk. Risk management is the process of identifying, evaluating, monitoring, and controlling any risks as defined above that are in the sphere of the company, and how the company can and the organization can react to those in order to achieve the objectives and also to speak to the sustainability of the business. The risk committee chart, how a risk committee is brought together and established is that a formal terms of reference is brought up by the governing body that governs how to set up a risk committee. This speaks to the composition of the risk committee, the committee's overall roles and responsibilities, the delegated authority with respect to decision making, so that they are able to make decisions and bring them forward to the board without just having unfounded recommendations. The tenure of the committee, so like we heard with the lecture, it's not a good idea for everybody to stay on for too long. When and how the committee should report to the governing body and to the rest of the directorship and executives. The committee's access to resources and information, the meeting procedures to be followed, and the M&E, the monitoring and evaluation of the committee's performance. So once the charter has been established that speaks to all of this, then we see the establishment of the actual committee, and Kevin will speak to that.
Okay, thank you, Judge. The establishment of the risk committee, the governing body should consider allocating the oversight of risk governance. So in other words, they should delegate the responsibility to the risk committee. If the committee for audit and risk are separate, the governing body should consider one or more members to have a joint membership of both committees for more effective functioning. So the risk committee is allowed to have an auditor from the auditing committee, or a member of the auditing committee, to be part of the risk committee. The committee of risk governance should have executive and non-executive members, and with the majority being non-executive, so that we don't have bias, and to have an objective and effective way in decision making. The establishment of the risk committee also has the body that delegates risk governance to the audit committee, and the audit committee should satisfy itself that it dedicates sufficient time to this responsibility. The members of the risk committee should be knowledgeable about the risk governance. So the people who are supposed to be in the committee should have the know-how on how to do, how to handle risk. So this includes risk identification, the impact of risk, and the risk response, which Unat is going to talk about soon. The members of the committee will be willing to give time and energy as active contributors. So these people who are in this committee should have the grit to come together and come up with risks that they will identify as a committee. The chairman of the body may be a member of the committee and may also be the chair. So this is the only committee that the chairman of the body is allowed to come in and be the chair. The appropriateness of the appointment of the office bearers. So at a minimum, risk committee should have the following office bearers. So the first one, obviously, from the governing body, the chairman, and the second one, we need one person, at least one person who has the know-how of how to manage risk, and this person should understand the company structure and also understand the risk profile, the complexities and activities and the size and the appropriateness of the framework. Then another member who is also a member of the audit committee. So basically there are three types of people, which is the minimum number that we have said that they are required from the charter, which was the guiding principle. So we have the chairperson of the body to come and be part of this risk committee. Then the second person is someone with the know-how of how to manage risk, how to identify risk. So, and then the other person is the audit member from the audit committee of Group 1. And then I'll pass on to Onati to give you the duties and responsibilities of the risk committee.
Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The duties and responsibilities of the risk committee here, we consider the risk policy and plan. Given the framework, the enterprise-wide risk management framework, and we determine the company's risk appetite, the risk tolerance, and ensure that the risk assessments are performed regularly on a monthly basis to biannual and so on, depending also in terms of the type of risks that we are looking at, being strategic risks, which are naturally the risk that will have a negative impact in achievement of the strategic objectives. Also looking at the operational risks, which are necessarily within the locus of control of the CEO. Here we monitor the whole risk management process and receive assurance from internal, external assurance providers regarding the effectiveness of this risk management process. Here we are just giving an illustration of, I don't know if all you could see, but I think this is the best that we could get this is Capitec, the Capitec Holdings Limited, and this is their governance structure. And I would see most governance structures, they just give you the board and the subcommittees. But what we appreciate about this illustration here is that they show you basically what is actually happening at a board level and the risk assurance that has been given at those various levels, up to the level of your operational risk or your business process risks. Now, to end this, we have, as the committee that is actually responsible for the risk governance, we actually looked at what are the high-level risks that we have identified. For sure, there's a risk of failure. This may be a hit or a miss. It happens. Risk impact that we also looked at is the offensive racial differences and the use of a a potentially offensive word, Foko. You must remember the history of this country. We come from different kind of situation where we're separated. Then people, they tend to actually place certain value, and there's cultural differences and traditions and all those things. All those things have got actually an influence, just at a very high level. But again, as the committee that is responsible for risk, we should make some recommendations to the governing body. We took the assumption as the group that we are actually a recommending committee, so the level of delegation that we have is off. We don't actually make decisions, but we recommend. And let's appreciate even from the audit committee for referring this matter to this committee. This is how we actually looked at the responses. We can accept the situation as it is, or what has been proposed to the governing body, that the video should be launched as it is in order to obtain feedback from the key stakeholders. We might be missing on a very big opportunity here. So this would allow for an opportunity for continuous improvement or upcycling. It happens with any product development exercise. Prevention is one of the options where the proposal to launch the video can be discouraged or disallowed if the high negative impact risks are not addressed or mitigated. We can't be reckless. You know, the Companies Act is very strict insofar as to curb any reckless trading. Then we look at contingency. Yes, a business rescue plan must be in place to face the consequences that would have a negative impact to the reputation of the organization. Again, here things linked to just the reckless trading as a key principle. Reduction. Yes, of course, not entirely the product is incorrect or is not appealing, or there could be some editing or editorial, whatever, that can be done with it to eliminate the content which is racially discriminative and biased.
I'm just interested, what do you find racially discriminative and biased in that movie?
Tim?
In the video, we see a white man sitting on a Rolls Royce, just next to the Rolls Royce, and then the disparity that is shown on the other side of the blacks. The blacks are associated with.
You're absolutely right. I've used that windmill before, where that observation has happened. I'm trying to show inequality. Okay, but it's being interpreted as being racial. Now, you've correctly identified that risk, which is great. Okay, so now maybe you can change it with the picture.
Yes.
Maybe you can change it with an alternative way of doing it. Yes. But what you're doing is right. Somebody might take offense to that it's always wealthy whitey, which is the message I'm trying to give wealthy whitey. Look at where you're living now. Okay, so I've got to find another way of doing the same thing that's not offensive, without throwing out the baby with the bathwater. Okay, but you're right.
Thanks, Prof. Concluding remarks. The Risk Governance Committee is guided by the Charter and the Terms of Reference. There is a locus of control, there is delegation that is given to this committee. It is recommended in line with the Terms of Reference to obtain an independent risk opinion from an expert. We actually take this from what we've learned with the roles name change, that we are very much quick to judge situations without actually getting an independent opinion or an expert opinion on the matter. So it's one of the conclusions that we are giving. Those are the list of references. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I thought that was really great. Okay. It's going to be a bit long to do all 5 non-stop. Let's have a 10-minute break. While you're having a 10-minute break, the name Foko is being debated. It's controversial. Does anybody come up with another name? So if you can throw another name at it, I'll give you my alternative suggestion.